On this episode of Uncommon Sense, we get to pick the brain of Dr. William Fahey. Many of you might know him as the president of Thomas More College, but some more of you might know him as a troubadour. Stay tuned for this exciting episode. Welcome to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. I'm Gretelyn Darkey, your host, introducing my new co-host, Joe Grabowski. Hi, Joe.
Hello, Gretelyn.
Good to have you today, and we are so blessed and excited to have you here, Dr. Fahey. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well, Gretelyn. Thank you.
Wonderful. Before we really get going, would you mind just for the very, the 3 or 4 people in the audience who don't know who you are, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Of the 5 people who are watching right now, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
As you said, I'm the 3rd president at Thomas More College in Merrimack, New Hampshire. More importantly, I teach at Thomas More College in Merrimack, New Hampshire. That's my vocation as far as a profession goes. I don't think any sane person has the vocation to be a college president, but I think that's enough. I would rather spend time talking about Chesterton than my background.
Wonderful. Well, then on that note, what first brought you to Chesterton? What's your sort of origin story there?
I suspected that you would ask this. Now, after having said I don't want to talk about me, let's talk about me. I was trying to think. You're likely to ask, how did I discover Chesterton or meet Chesterton? And as far back as I can go, I think I have to owe it to television. When I must have been 10 or 11, there used to be, back in the age when there were 3 TV stations and PBS, Public Broadcasting, used to have the show called Mystery, I think it was called, and they ran the first version, I understand there's a second one, of the Father Brown stories, or a British screen adaptation of the Father Brown stories. So I know that's probably when Chesterton enters my mind, but it would have been when I was a graduate student. So some of my graduate education was in Scotland, and that's where I met the woman who would become my wife. So in a way, I owe it to my wife. One of her colleagues in her department, someone named Robert Wire, a native of Oklahoma, was a big Belloc fan, and he introduced me to Belloc. And I have to admit, this may be somewhat heretical on this podcast. I'm more of a Belloc man than a Chesterton man, but you can't like Hilaire Belloc without liking his friends. So I got to know a little bit about Belloc, but I can actually date my reading of Chesterton because I received as a present on the 5th of December in 1992 Orthodoxy from my friend Giuseppe Butera, who's a philosopher. We were in graduate school, and he loved Orthodoxy, and as a present for having just gotten engaged, I was engaged the day after Thanksgiving in 1992, Joe gave me a copy of Orthodoxy, and despite Planet Earth's worst book cover, I'm about to show this to you, and the viewers may faint when they see how bad this is. I read the book, so isn't that awful?
Oh, man.
Yeah, that's what the church was like in the 1980s, too. It's just dreadful. We might be moving in that direction again. Who knows? But despite the terrible cover, I read that book. So 1992, I read Orthodoxy, and that begins my friendship with G.K. Chesterton.
Wonderful. I don't think Chesterton would disapprove that you like Belloc. I think he liked Belloc plenty, so that's great.
Actually, it's refreshing, if anything, to hear an origin story of Chesterton reading that is not via C.S. Lewis or the Inklings or something like that, but a contemporary, in fact, kind of a bit of an older brother in English literature with Hilaire Belloc. Just a bit of an older brother, but Belloc's career was certainly established by the time Chesterton gets going. So that's kind of a neat way of getting into Chesterton. It's kind of the way many people at the time would have done, I imagine.
Yeah. It was actually, in some regard, my my fascination with both Belloc and Chesterton was not initially through reading anything. It was knowing people who knew a lot about them. They themselves had read some Chesterton and Belloc, or they had virtually, in Chesterton's case, they would just have the best sections of the autobiography practically memorized. And so my engagement with both of them it was a little bit more like you meet a friend who's telling you about this great friend that they have that they want you to meet one day. So I had all these stories and ideas about both of them, and they represented not simply an interesting author, but almost an entire way of living, looking at reality. That's in a way that sounds trite, but it's simply true. And that sort of captured my imagination at the right point where I'm thinking through going to get married, I want to start a family, I'm going to be a teacher, where will I live? All these questions are in my mind right when I meet them. And that was a real blessing, because those are two good guides to how to live well. So, yeah.
That's actually an excellent segue to my next question, which is how did Chesterton shape your thoughts? So you're saying you had all these questions. Chesterton kind of came in at the perfect moment. What were some of the answers that you found?
I think I think the main lesson, if we want to call it that, is that the right word? I don't like that. The map I got from G.K. Chesterton, and continue to see more deeply. I mean, this is what I like about Chesterton, is seeing what is always the way most humans live their life. Ordinary things. Just an ordinary life, really. I think one of the hardest things, probably even so-called great people struggle with this. They think life is dull, or I'm ordinary, or I'm not as great as someone else in my imagination. I think the great gift of Chesterton was this idea of the romance of things that are ordinary, or are norms, that often, especially in our age, are viewed with suspicion as dull, or somehow not liberating, whatever. There's the usual cant about how terrible Orthodox religion is, or a stable marriage, a family living in a small town. I mean, in Chesterton's theme, which just runs through so much of his work, both his fiction and his essays, is that the ordinary is this epic battleground for just the best kinds of adventures. And that our problem is we don't think very clearly anymore, so we don't see that. So there was a practical side to that, obviously. It just, in those moments when life gets hard and you have those George Bailey moments when you just want to get out of Bedford Falls, you realize, well, Bedford Falls is actually terribly romantic, and this is just great. I might need to go around the world to realize it again, but this is where I'm meant to be, and I do love it. And then moving away from the practical, just living day in, day out, I think Chesterton gave me a real appreciation of going back to Scripture and thinking about the Incarnation. Because it strikes me that Chesterton, in his particular way, and it's a very British thing. I don't actually think it's unique just to Chesterton. I do think there's something, it's almost a gift of British Christian culture, this love of coziness and small things that are quite homey. I think that is simply at the heart of the Incarnation, that our Lord enters into history not as an epic hero, but makes the ordinary man in an ordinary village the new place of epic adventures. And Chesterton definitely helped me sort of meditate on that more profoundly and just dwell on the Incarnation. So that's another lesson or gift from GK.
I would say those two go together, because it kind of is the Incarnation that sort of sanctified all these things in some way. Yeah, wonderful way to approach Chesterton, and I don't know, I feel very grateful to him in similar ways. It's definitely when you're most feeling bored of the ordinary that he can shake you up in the best possible way.
Yeah, and I love the fact that Chesterton, in my opinion, is almost at his best in the essay writing that he did for the most ephemeral of publications. It's some real gems in like his journalism, and there's something kind of fitting and apt in that Chesterton, he was a daily household item, as it were, in his contemporary age, and so many people, I think, get intimidated by reading Chesterton, but I think reading in Chesterton or reading into Chesterton, just an essay here or there, make it a daily practice as though he was in your Illustrated London News that you were getting delivered to your porch every morning. That's a really rewarding way to get the wisdom that Chesterton has to offer into your own life, and begin to try to live it out and to see it and to see the blessing of the ordinary. So I think it's that small Englander kind of mentality that Chesterton exhibits so well. I think it's very well observed that that's just a key part of him.
Yeah, I'll make another confession. I'm glad you said that. I actually find it very hard to read the classic Chesterton books, not the novels, but Everlasting Man, even Orthodoxy. I love those books, but then you get to the Dumb Ox or St. Francis. I remember throwing St. Francis across the room. I had a very hard time reading it, and I think what you said describes why. Chesterton's forte is the short piece, which is hard. It's hard to get the truth across in a small space. And like many men of letters, some of those books are just stitching together the London Illustrated Times or essays and creating a book, and it's almost too intense. It's like having too many espressos or something. You just kind of addle, you go crazy trying to read his prose at a great length. I have to admit, I don't actually like reading the books as much as I like reading the essays. That's not entirely true. The fiction I can read a little bit more comfortably at length, but someone on your end, get Dale to do this. He cranks out a book every 3 months. There should be sort of a companion volume to the Divine Office, which are just daily readings of Chesterton. Maybe that already exists, but it is better in the smaller. He is better, I think, in those original essays. I think that's how he thought. I think his mind almost was too powerful. He could sustain all these small things at once, but mere mortals, I prefer just reading an essay by Chesterton than trying to tackle an entire book.
It is, I will say, I tend to agree with you about the sort of essay books. I think that is more or less what they are. It's easier to read them in the context of your local society, though. And I have, just shameless plug, if you're interested in joining a local society, that is a great way to get through some of those bigger books, because you can literally go, a month on one chapter. You're not, drinking the whole can of espresso at once, because it can definitely feel like that. And you just start to sort of not understand what you're reading. But thank you for that insight. I think it's nice to hear people admit things like this. It's helpful. Well, just out of curiosity, though, do you have a favorite Chesterton piece? Whether novel, essay?
Well, as far as the novels that's a hard one to answer because I haven't read enough of them. I really do like Napoleon of Notting Hill. I recommend Man Alive first, because I actually, that's a required book actually at Thomas More College. It's the last thing the seniors read, and I recommend it, and our seniors read it because I think it speaks explicitly and succinctly in a story form to some of the major problems of our age: boredom, fidelity, this whole question of the domestic being boring. It's a great book when you're trying to sort through your vocation as a young person, I think, to read and think about. The essays, to be honest, it's probably it sounds trite, but I really like some of those standards. What I found in my pocket, and the essay about lying in bed and chasing your hat. Those are great. I do like the essays. I mean, the one book that I did just enjoy reading straight through that I know is based on essays, but goes a little bit against what I said earlier. I really like the Outline of Sanity as a nonfiction work, and the tone. Another one that I like, and it has a remarkably different tone than some of the other books, is his book on Robert Louis Stevenson, where it's still Chesterton. It still very much feels like Chesterton, but there's a kind of I don't want to say academic because that's often a bad word even amongst academics, but there's a seriousness of what he's doing as a critic in that book. I really find that book quite good too. And his book on Chaucer is really good too. So I have to take back some of my comments on reading a book by GKC. But as far as the essays go, what would the favorite? My favorite might be, and I can't remember the exact title, but he has one on cheese that I go back to. It might just be called On Cheese or something like that.
It might be.
That's delightful. I enjoy reading that one.
Lovely. Well, I'm just going to take a quick pause here and let everybody know that Dr. William Fahey is intending to go to the conference this year and has been at conferences in the past, and I think would tell people that it's a nice conference and you should go. But we do actually have registration open at this moment. If you go to chesterton.org/conference, you can find out more. If you want to hear, hopefully, Dr. Fahey, others like him, and many, many Chestertonian friends will be there. Please feel free to, again, visit chesterton.org/conference and just check that out. We'd love to see you there for sure.
It's a great conference. It is absolutely one of my favorites. Really, I only know of about 2 conferences that I like to go consistently, where I know that I have a great time. One is the Prairie Troubadour Conference. Dale Ahlquist has come out for that. I just came back from that. That was a couple weekends ago. But the Chesterton Conference, every time I've gone, it's amazing. It's this mixture of, you hear formal, very thoughtful, sometimes almost too detailed talks where you have to go back and listen to the recording. You'd like to read it in book form. You have more popular talks that are just delightful. It's worth the price of admission just to watch Dale Ahlquist for 2 or 3 days. Be Dale Ahlquist. That's remarkable, and the evenings are fantastic. You've got to come prepared for the evenings at the Chesterton conference. So anyone who's never gone, who's watching this, that's really odd that you've never gone. You really must go. So, yeah, I hope to be there. I've been invited with all the troubadours, and I really hope to be there again. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful time.
You're not the first speaker that I've talked to that said that they really, this is like one of their favorite conferences. So, and the other one I can think of off the top of my head was Joseph Pierce. So
sure.
I don't know if any of that sways you. This is a good conference. Chesterton.org/conference, just to find out more. Anyway, we're getting close to the end of our time here, but we have a few more minutes. If you wouldn't mind veering off a little bit, I would love to hear how you feel about being one of the troubadours and what your experience in that realm is like.
Well, I love it, but it's strange. It's really quite strange. I mean, it was this spontaneous idea at the outset of COVID. I think some people know the story. Very reluctantly, Dan Kerr had to cancel the Prairie Troubadour Conference, and in the weeks following that, there were just loads of people at a loss of what to do, regardless of what anyone thought at the time. Many people were nervous. Everyone was terribly depressed. And we were having, and all the troubadours were having either one of these bizarre exchange via text or email. And in the conversation, I just threw out of, why don't we do this on Zoom? I had never heard of Zoom prior to 2 weeks before, because Thomas More College, we were the last American program in Europe to be closed because of COVID. We were the last college in New England forcibly closed by COVID. So I had in my brain the good and evil of COVID, of Zoom. And I just threw out there, well, why don't we do something on this Zoom? And then it started this thing, why would we do that? To cheer people up, and everyone's going to be gloomy. And I tell people now, it's one of, in my life, it's one of the blessings of that whole period. And I don't want to make light of COVID because people suffered, people died. But in my own life, I knew Joseph Pierce. We had gone to Germany together. I'd known him for some years. I knew Dale. I knew Dan. I knew everyone. I knew Chris Check. But I didn't know them very, very well. And this has just led to all of us becoming very good friends because we're in monthly communication with one another. People who watch the Troubadours, I don't know if you can probably tell, we're on together for about a half an hour before we go live. And we talk about everything apart from the Troubadours. So it's just great. I mean, I love it because it's a friendship rather than some kind of show, and we're not really promoting anything. And what's strange is I almost feel selfish that we keep doing it. And then I'll go someplace and people will come up to me and say, "Oh, I really love you." We sit down with my wife and we make tiki drinks or something. There seems to be this whole troubadour culture that's emerged. I find that hysterical and wonderful, but yeah, I still have mixed feelings because it's mediated as this is through the internet, and I'm a bit of a Luddite, but I'm also realistic. If these technologies can be used following the principle of subsidiarity, and they help us actually be less centralized and realize human flourishing and community more, great. Let's try to use them. But the troubadour phenomena is it's a little bit odd, even though it is a great blessing in my life.
I think it was quite a light in the darkness for a lot of people, and probably still is. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Absolutely. I tune in every month, and just it's it's like what you would imagine being able to maybe sit at a table a little away from the Inklings as they were having their regular meeting or chat or something. Maybe not quite so highbrow, but it does get sometimes critical and a little bit playful barbing going back and forth the way the Inklings famously were. So maybe not too dissimilar either. I have one final question, I think, from my end anyway, Dr. Fahey, and it was I'm noticing kind of a theme arising in a lot of what you've mentioned. So you've mentioned Napoleon Notting Hill, Belloc, Chesterton's essay on cheese, and I know from your bio I saw a mention of Father Vincent McNabb as well. And I also see that you have a degree in wildlife conservation and then certificates in beekeeping. And all of that in cohesion together gives me the feeling anyway that you have something, I think, some words of wisdom you could share with our audience about how that all connects, the importance of what it is that Chesterton's getting at maybe in that essay on cheese, that he's driving us to be in contact with the real, the incarnate, with the nature. Any words of wisdom as a beekeeper that you could offer to our audience? I think
I am
would be
a failed
appreciated.
beekeeper. my bees all died.
It's worth doing.
But I
it's
tried
worth doing
hard.
badly.
It was wonderful. Here's some things about bees. I'll mention this, and I hope to try again. But my bees, didn't make it through last year's winter, and I didn't have the heart to start up again this past summer. The, you know, there was a certain point early on after I had two hives of bees, and I would just go out. The thing about beekeeping, it partially appealed to me because one of the things I currently teach is natural history. My background is in classical languages and history, and I later, because I'm at a great books college, went into what most people would identify as science. And so in some respects, it's an outgrowth of my interests in natural history. I thought I'll get bees, and sort of I can maybe have the students over, and we can do some things where we're observing the social life of bees. And early on, I was out looking at the bees, and beekeeping appealed to me because I am ferociously lazy. And the thing about beekeeping is you do a fair amount of work early on to get them established. And then you've either done things prudently and you just step back and let nature take its course, or you made some mistakes early on that you don't see, which was the case, I think, with me, and the hives aren't going to make it. So you've got this interesting relationship that's not quite dependency, it's quasi-domesticated creature with man. They're so delightful to observe, though. And early on, I was sitting out there looking at the bees, and I thought, if I don't get a single pound of honey, I'm going to try to be a beekeeper for my entire life. Because it's just so beautiful to interact and watch them. And your mind pretty quickly goes to higher things as you're observing bees, as is often the case in looking at how things act in nature towards a certain end, how beautifully and wonderfully they're designed. I mean, in my case, natural science, natural history is really on a determined path. The train always arrives at the same station, which is prayer and being absolutely in wonder at the created order. And I think much of Chesterton is just making that point. You know, look at the magic in, to use a kind of Chestertonian word, look at the magic in our world. How did it get there? What kind of power stands behind the world that it's so delightful? We're used to focusing on the true tragedies. You know, I don't want to say there's not quite a bit of tragedy and suffering, but I think we're like Denethor. We get so transfixed looking in the Palantir and looking at evil things and terrible things that we forget to just look up a little bit at the ordinary things that are just magical and wonderful and ask, why is it so? It doesn't have to be that way. If we believe all the agnostics and atheists, it certainly doesn't have to be that way. The world could be designed in any number of ways, but it's not. What does that mean? So, you know, if I'm to tie together something like my late blooming interest in wildlife conservation and bees with Mr. Chesterton, it would be that. You know, I don't think he kept bees. I know he had a donkey or two. I doubt he gardened, but he understood and took delight in the created order, which includes us. You know, we're all part of the amazing created order. London is part of the created order in a way that a beehive is part of the created order. It's a different creature that made it, but it's fascinating in its own right.
That's amazing. I would say that's in many ways how Chesterton himself came to Christ. I mean, I'm in the joy of reading Maisie Ward's biography of him right now, and it's just so clear that a lot of Chesterton's journey to the faith was just through nature and thinking it didn't have to be so, but it was, and it's a gift, and who do I thank for this gift? And that's kind of, the rest is history, but yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Answer your question, Joe? You good?
Yep, I think that's what I was looking for. It was very worthy reflection on the mother bee that contributes so much to us. So thank you.
Not at all. My pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, we are unfortunately out of time, but thank you so very much, Dr.
No, it was
Fahey,
great
for
fun.
joining
Thank
us.
you.
That was wonderful. And thank you, Joe, for starting this adventure and co-hosting with me. This is great.
It's a great pleasure.
I'll see you at the conference, I hope.
I hope so,
Hope
too.
so.
Yes. And just for everyone out there, remember chesterton.org/conference if you wanna come. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and if you can, leave us a positive review so that we can continue to reach even more people and spread the wit and wisdom of Chesterton to more people than ever. And thank you for listening, and as always, remember, Chesterton is always better with friends. Talk to you next time.